Hi, welcome to Virtual CAAM. My name is Cameron Shaw. I'm the Deputy Director and Chief Curator at the California African American Museum. Thanks so much for joining us tonight for FUPU, Black Women in Performance in the Punk Rock Tradition, which we're hosting in conjunction with the exhibition Nikita Gale, Private Dancer. The exhibition is currently installed and waiting for you when museums in Los Angeles reopen. One reference point for the exhibition is rock and roll pioneer Tina Turner, who paved the way for an entire generation of rock and subgenre musicians to emerge. Amongst them is FUPU, South LA's own all-Black Femme punk band. Tonight we have FUPU lead vocalist Jasmine Nyende and performance artists Gabrielle Civil and Mayfield as they explore Black women's performance and their work in relation to Nikita Gale's exhibition. So welcome everyone. Before we get into that, I'd like to share a little bit about our panelists. Mayfield Brooks improvises while Black and is currently based in Brooklyn, New York. Mayfield is a movement-based performance artist, vocalist, urban farmer, writer, and wanderer. They are currently an artist in residence at the Center for Performance Research and Abrams Art Center in New York City. Mayfield is faculty at Movement Research NYC and the editor-in-chief of the Movement Research Performance Journal. Mayfield teaches and performs practices that arise from their life, art, and movement work. Jasmine Nyende is a textile artist and lead vocalist for punk rock band FUPU, Pay Us, otherwise known as FUPU. Her practice explores DIY, skill share and community building as radical means of creating anti-capitalist frameworks in art. She leads workshops from her studio and online classes about fiber arts and is currently studying Black American craft traditions and ways we preserve culture through embodied knowledges. Tonight's program is moderated by Gabrielle Seville, a Black feminist performance artist, poet, and writer originally from Detroit, Michigan. She has premiered 50 original performance artworks around the world, including in Ghana, Zimbabwe, the Gambia, Puerto Rico, Canada, and Mexico, where she lived as a Fulbright Fellow. Her performance memoirs include Swallow the Fish, Experiments in Joy, and Ghost Gestures performance writing. She was also lead contributor to Experiments in Joy, a workbook. A 2019 Rima Hort Mann LA Emerging Artist, she teaches creative writing and critical studies at the California Institute of the Arts. The aim of her work is to open up space. So thank you all so much for being here tonight. I'm excited to turn the program over to you. And for our folks at home, we invite you to use the Q&A feature, which Gabrielle will be checking throughout the program. Take it away, guys.
Thank you so much. What's up, Black people? How are you two doing tonight?
Hello.
Hi. Well, as people can see, I'm kind of silly and playful, which I think is the best spirit and energy to walk into the virtual Zoom room. I'm so sad that we're not able to breathe each other's air or like help generate each other's sweat. But the good thing about the Zoom room is even in this virtual space, we can still bring to us whoever it is that we want to be here with us as we start to talk about Black performance, Black femme performance, women's performance, queer performance, radical performance, FUPU, improvising while Black, all these things that I hope we get to just dig into. But first, who we want to bring into this space with us now? Who's here with us?
I would say that definitely my ancestors are here with us. I think that everyone who's paved the way is here with us. I know that Prince is in the room with your candle. James Baldwin is in the room.
I got objects, y'all.
Marsha P. Johnson.
Marsha P.
I got Toni Morrison and Nina Simone up there too.
What's up, Toni Morrison and Nina Simone? What's up? And then I think that all of the current and former and future members of FUPU are definitely here with us. Do you want to show off your merch a little bit, Jasmine?
Yeah, I'm wearing this special shirt that I made. So this is some FUPU merch, some very like exclusive. I only made, I think, a line of 10 of these shirts.
Wow.
And then I usually gave them away. And here are these. So yeah, this shirt holds a lot of power to me.
Wow.
The last time I wore this shirt was at Afropunk last year.
Hey, is that it? And was it in New York City and Brooklyn?
It's in New York, yes.
Right. And then Mayfield, can you just lift up Tony and Nina again right quick?
Yeah.
Just because I feel like we can never see them
I
too.
forgot Harriet Tubman is there.
And Harriet. What?
Yeah.
Well, I just have to, one more. I mean, just because if we're talking about ancestors, this is my grandmother on her wedding day, my mother's mother, and then this is my father's mother, because then I'll get in trouble if I only show one. So you can't play favorites like that.
Yeah.
And when we think about ancestors, and then when we think about what the paradigms or predecessors have been for us in the various fields of performance that we have made or that we've observed or witnessed or that have informed us, I think it's helpful to bring in those names and to just continue to think about lineages and kind of diverse lineages that we come from. Some are from bloodlines, some are from artistic choice. You know, who are our artistic families that we're choosing to be a part of? And some, I mean, I feel like for me, there are a lot of influence as well, or people that I want to bring in the room that aren't necessarily Black, that aren't necessarily women. Let me talk about Bjork for a minute. Let me talk about, I don't know, I think I was just listening to Flying Lotus. I mean, we're diverse, we're multiple. And as we talked tonight, I want to, I guess, remind the people who are listening to us how we intersect in multiple ways, and just that we're going to maybe turn on a dime. Mm-hmm. In terms of turning on a dime or intersecting with multiple ways, I also do want to mention that, at least I know here in California, I want to acknowledge that sort of the southern LA basin is the traditional land of the Gabrielina and Tangva people. And I want to make sure to bring my gratitude for the stewardship for that land in the space. And I know, Mayfield, it's pretty important to you as well to name where you are.
Yes, I am in the land of the Lenape people, known as Lenape Hoking. And that's basically all of New York City.
So we have that kind of incredible stewardship and land. And then we also have the reality of sort of Black bodies that have worked on pretty much all of the land of what is, you know, called the United States of America. I mean, we have a debate that's happening for these two people that are going to be named sort of that the leaders of this place, one of them. And we understand that underneath all of that, there are these other landscapes, these other legacies. And thinking in terms of landscape and legacy, I wanted to ask the two of you. We've brought some people into the room, but the same way that Nikita Gale has really lifted up Tina Turner as a part of the Private Dancer exhibit, I'm just curious, who would be people, especially in terms of your own artistic or creative practice, that you could claim or lift up as important influences?
Wish I could start, Mayfield?
Oh, well, thank you. Sure. I'm thinking about Julius Eastman, mm-hmm. who was a composer here in New York, avant-garde composer, queer. And I found out about him because he performed at the Kitchen, and I performed there last year, and it kind of, there was this interesting kind of intersection of his memory and his willingness to kind of go the distance with his work and with being queer and Black and pretty radical, actually, and in a very white world of the New York kind of avant-garde scene. And and Marsha P. Johnson also. And interestingly enough, both of them died in their 40s and basically a year apart, 91 and 92. And so performing in that space last year of, you know, the kitchen felt very electric because I knew he had been there and I knew he had performed there. And also Marsha hung out in that neighborhood in Chelsea, right? And was being fabulous and lighting up the streets and, you know, basically ushering in the modern, you know, gay liberation movement, basically. And so, you know, just kind of like feeling that I had to commune with them, not mourn them or memorialize them, but commune with them. So I wrote them both a letter at the same time. I introduced them in the letter. I was like, did y'all know each other? And I like to practice writing letters to my ancestors. So.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much. Jasmine, what about you?
Right now, two names are really coming to mind, and that would be Alice Coltrane.
Oh,
yes, and Michelle T. Clinton. So Michelle T. Clinton in particular, because she really opened up my mind to this idea of like a literary tradition of Black lesbian poetry and writing coming from Los Angeles. And I actually found her words while I was at the Metro on Vermont Metro Station. And on the floor of the Vermont Metro Station in South Central is one of her poems, actually almost spent like on the ground, kind of like in this snake circular fashion. And I remember seeing the word dot. And I remember this moment very clearly because it was just the word dot. And then I had to follow it to read the poem. And it was so beautiful to be on that journey while I waited for my train to go to school, to go to high school in the mornings. I take the train every day. And it was also this time where I had to sit down and really think about the role of public art, because it is, and the whole line was like about how we can all feel like specks of dots on this world, but when we have those moments of realizing that we're all floating together, these are the moments that should like fill us with this feeling of hope and humanity. And even in that commute, to be met with poetry was so inspiring to me. So that was when and then I researched her on my way to school on my phone, and just like, then got one of her books, and then like that just really opened me up to this style of writing. And then like learning more about even like realizing that she was a Black lesbian also from South Central, I was like, whoa, like that's incredible. And then Alice Coltrane also gave me that moment of listening to a sound that felt so different than everything else, yet felt so familiar in a deeper way, because especially that's one of the beautiful things about improvising, where it feels familiar in a way that's deeper than just recognizing a note or knowing how it's made. It's almost like this feeling of like a deeper knowing that comes with that sound. And so those are two artists that are definitely a part of my mental map of what inspires me to create.
And the name of the poet, this is a question that came up in the chat. The name of the poet is Michelle T. Clinton. And if I'm not mistaken, Michelle's got an accent over that first E. And there's an incredible recording of Michelle T. Clinton with Wanda Coleman, where they are throwing down. So you have like two LA Black women poets that are throwing down. And people should definitely try to check that out. One thing I'm noticing though, and what both you, Mayfield, and you, Jasmine, said, is how kind of place really cradled your relationship to these people. So I'm thinking about, Mayfield, you in the kitchen, and then I'm thinking in the venue, the kitchen, and I'm thinking also, Jasmine, about you in that train station, and thinking again about landscape and then what gets overlaid on landscape, and how as we're encountering the things that inspire us, if we're thinking about especially artistic claims and legacy and lineage, it isn't just, let's say, a voice or a line of a poem or something on a page, or I guess it can be for some people or in some moments, but there's also a holistic experience that can be really important. And that is something that inspires me. I mean, there's a lot, if we want to talk about literary people, I mean, I think a lot about Ntozake Shange. I think a lot about these Black women poets in the Harlem Renaissance, who's like Anne Spencer or Georgia Douglas Johnson, whose names aren't well known, but who really taught me something important about what happens if you don't archive your work, or if you don't care for your work, or you don't have people look out for your work. It gets thrown away, and how they fought in their lives against oblivion. And so if you see one poem by Anne Spencer from 1921 or 22, a lot had to happen for that poem to still get to you. And you had to probably do a lot. I mean, of course, I encountered those things before the internet, where there were a lot of socks and shoes you had to put on to find things. But I'm thinking how much artistic legacy is manifested through structure, through location. And that makes me think actually of Nikita Gale and Private Dancer. And I wonder if this could be a time for us to just, the three of us, to just look at this incredible artwork for a minute and see what we see. So Cameron, would you mind just sharing with us these views of Private Dancer by Nikita Gale? Thank you. And so I'm just curious, Jasmine and Mayfield, when you see that work, what do you see? What strikes you?
I see how the stage is meant to always make someone seem bigger than life, to see it deconstructed, to bring it back down to life. I see how, what happens when like seeing the elements of a structure in process instead of just seeing the completed thing. Like, I feel like I'm seeing the behind the scenes, I'm seeing the fact of like the people who actually built the stage, people who provide the lights, the people, all these hands to create this experience of one person or a band. I'm seeing that all brought back down and tear it apart and put back together in certain ways to just show the elements of something adding up to a bigger experience.
Yeah, I think I was really struck by the architecture of the actual moving lights, and how the architecture of that apparatus somehow complemented the architecture of the actual circles of light that, you know, were moving around the space on the walls, and the starkness of that and the contrast between the light and the metal. Like, there was something about the light and the metal, and then the kind of soft shades of gray. And I think as a dancer, it was, you know, and then, you know, private dancer, it did feel like this was a private space, even though it is announcing a kind of performative grandeur, but it also felt private because of the spotlight. There's something about a spotlight that like makes that moment where you come into it feel private, but it's actually a shared private moment. And so, yeah, it's just striking to kind of engage with a kind of multifaceted image, but that's kind of blown out with the starkness, you know, of the light and the shapes and the architecture. And yet there's this kind of personal quality to it, and especially thinking about Tina Turner, you know, being very alone for a very long time, and no one really knowing what her struggle was. And so that room, I felt like that room was like almost like a shrine to her in a way, but at the same time, it was like blown out, because no, I don't think anyone will ever really know what happened, what her story is, you know, and she's 80 now. So, you know, there's been a movie and all this, but like, it's like, there's so much there, but it's also very private, and like the Private Dancer song, you know, talks about it.
So some things I've heard from what you both said that I think are interesting for us to kind of think about relative to our own practices as well. First of all, the behind the scenes quality, or the idea of an intersection of public and private, and the things that we know and that we don't know, and how a stage it can be a site where on the one hand it seems completely public, and yet the experience of the performer can be radically private. I mean, or that we don't actually always know what is happening for the performer, with the performer, in the performer. And at the same time, the performer can be giving so much to the audience and to the world. And I'm curious if in your own experience, whether in dance, whether in music, whether with FUPU or in Improvising While Black Mayfield, you've had that experience, that of feeling both kind of radically private or having a really singular experience, and then also feeling yourself to be very exposed or very blown out.
Oh, yes. Like just thinking about this, thinking about how the survival of FUPU definitely depended on our honesty, because the structure in place wasn't there to support us. So when we were honest about not having, like, for example, when we'd have a show, of course, the venue wouldn't really consider maybe us getting rides there as a place where we need money, we need help. We're coming from all different parts of LA. And the fact that we're a smaller band, like so much of how we could even get to these places was through living the truth of what our band's message was through reparations, was through GoFundMes. It was through being honest about what we needed. When we needed a guitar, we asked for a guitar. And in a white ally brought us a guitar after our show. It's like these ways of having to live the truth to even keep that survival going definitely taught me about how what you see on the stage has there's so many hours of planning just to get to that half hour of performing in front of a crowd, you know, or even like this element of where, for example, at the Palladium show, where after we performed, we gave it our all, and the audience is still clapping and hollering FUPU. One of our bandmates couldn't even get backstage because the bodyguard didn't think they could possibly be in the band. Wow. They didn't have a sticker on while they were just on stage performing. It's like these ways, and then we had to be honest about that to get respect. We had to be honest about that to show and to let the audience know about what was going on. And these are the things that made FUPU almost like so taboo in the music industry of LA, and even in these venues and these promoters, but it's also what made our fans see the real honest truth behind being in a band like this. And it kept us authentic, it kept us connected to ourselves and connected to our mission, because it always was about the meaning beyond just trying to make money or be famous or anything like that. So yeah, that letting in was what kept us honest. That letting in is what kept us alive. That letting in is how we got through the years that we were performing without representation or a manager, a tour, and it was all us, you know?
Mayfield, what would you say?
No, I feel you, Jasmine, because I'm definitely like have more of a punk sensibility, and I'm definitely anti-capitalist, and like I've never had a major grant ever, you know? But I for me, it was important, has always been important to stay kind of clear of the institutions so that I can have my autonomy, but engage with them, you know, as much as I need to get what I need to get done. But has been even more important is just relationships. And so like, you know, the piece that I just did before COVID was about me being with the work that I've been doing for years, which is urban farming, and using the compost that I made at the farm where I worked in the Bronx, using that compost to bury my body, you know, with respect to my ancestors, and also working with, you know, florists and walking the same streets that Marsha walked when she got the flowers for her hair, and using those decayed flowers on my body as a way to, you know, be with the work and not separate, and also a way to be with people in a different way, because I was in repose under the compost and the decayed flowers, and I would have small groups of people coming in to be with me in that space of being in this kind of fake wake, you know. And that, I called it like decomposing dance, like choreographing breath, because that's what they saw. They were with me with the breath. And so I feel like it's so important to, you know, it's been important as an artist to really like stick with my value system, and yeah, just kind of hold, you know, stay with it. Just keep it close, keep the values close, because otherwise I think if I had, you know, betrayed myself just even a tiny little bit and went for some kind of big, gigantic grant or whatever, I wouldn't have been burying myself in compost. Like, I just, you know, I'd be trying to, like, I don't know, dance. I don't know. You know, I'm dancing in a different way. I'm communing with my ancestors, you know, so it's like, I have to be true to what I'm doing. I can't mess with that, you know? So there's a lineage, and it's like, I feel like, I don't know, I just love that that's, yeah, you're being honest on stage. Like we have to, there's no like other way, right?
Exactly. And then when you do that, you're building a whole new infrastructure for future musicians, future dancers, future artists to kind of know and hold. Like, I think that every time we do something that is like separate from these institutions, that's when we are creating something that is like for me, when I think about these things that are happening, for example, like would my ancestors even feel comfortable on certain stages that we were denied, or like from certain spaces that would I actually feel comfortable bringing all this power to this kind of space that I know won't support me? Like, for example, people were like, oh, FUPU Coachella. I was like, would I be happy at a Coachella? Would even I, you know, like would I actually want to spend my time and my music and my voice and all of that energy for people who probably wouldn't even care about these messages beyond me entertaining them for a half hour? It's like, no, it's like sometimes with this kind of a practice, like the mission drives itself to where the people kind of stay away when they can kind of sense that. For example, like with FUPU, when I think about like the way we even made music, it was never about pleasing anyone's ear. It was about letting the values, letting the feelings and the emotions guide where we go. And when you're doing that, it's in such a place where it's like the opportunities that open up will have to align with that, because that's what's leading it.
Yeah.
I love that idea of keeping the values close and thinking about those values as being related not necessarily to what is pleasing to the ear. I mean, that's the punk part, and allowing for it to be jarring if it needs to be jarring, allowing for it to be wild or harsh if it needs to be wild and harsh, and allowing for it to be melodic at the times when you want it to be melodic. Whatever it is that you need, then you can bring into that moment, and that's related to values that are aesthetic values, but are also political, social, economic, historical, spiritual values. That's what I'm hearing from you all, and I feel also aligned with that. Although I'm sort of like, I don't mind the grant. You know? You know what? Give Mayfield the grant. And Mayfield, I know that you'll have an existential crisis about taking it, but then I'll just call you on the phone and be like, Mayfield, take the grant. Bite the hand that feeds you.
I got my first one this year.
I mean, I think it might be nice to actually look at viewing hours if you want to show it, just so that people can really see the beauty of that work.
I have a 30-second clip, so.
Mm-hmm. Everybody get prepared for the beauty. Thank you so much for showing us that. I think it's interesting to have that image, that video, next to the Nikita Gale images as well, because what we're talking about then are the metallic, the architectural, and kind of the organic and the natural. And that feels important maybe to think about, or just to recognize how both of those elements or qualities are a part of the performance traditions, I think, that we have inherited and that we're contributing to. And that there's something around the earth and the land, but there's something also around infrastructures, either lacking infrastructures or you need to build infrastructures, and then scaffoldings. And so Jasmine, what you were talking about in terms of saying like, we didn't have the infrastructure that we needed. And so we had to build and make and ask for the infrastructure and be honest about what we had and we didn't have, so that we could really gather and bring to us what we needed. And then also thinking about that as a part of a scaffolding to help support other artists to do similar things. In the meantime, hoping that we all can try to be as grounded as possible in these other kinds of processes and of time. That idea of decomposing dance, that's a different relationship to the earth. And that is also, I mean, literally in your work, Mayfield, but I hear, when I listen to some FUPU songs, I hear also that kind of that decomposition of this inherited thing that maybe isn't working or just needs to be broken down or settled into in a different kind of way. So I don't know if either one of you want to speak to either of those things, infrastructure and scaffolding, or that kind of decomposing or grounding.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely hear it in FUPU. I love FUPU's music.
About decomposing instead of however, the memory and the usefulness to serve multiple cycles. And I think that that's something that happens when it is coming from the authentic place. It happens when your ancestors are in the room. It happens when your values are in the room. It's like, instead of feeling like it's something that's just thrown away, or something that, like, even when FUPU broke up or when we're separated, it doesn't feel like a death. It doesn't. It truly, truly, truly doesn't, because the lessons it taught me will move on. The way that we opened up these conversations are the ways that are Black artists getting paid enough by just doing shows, or do we need that for reparations to happen? Should white musicians who are in industries that are historically Black, like when white rappers and people who like that, like, are we gonna think about ways that they're actually giving reparations to people who have like we're operations of music and reparations? Like how, like I think those are the lessons that make me feel like this was a decomposing, not a disposability. And then one last thing is, like, with that comes this idea of like how we even see the bandmates, like with Uhuru and me, like I still see that relationship as still in existence. Like I still want to make sure that I'm economically supporting them. I still want to make sure that I don't just think, oh, well, we're not in the band anymore. Like, bye. Like, no, it has to be this thing where it's like, they have meant so much to me in my life. They taught me so many of these lessons. Like, FUPU is always going to be a unit. It's not always just going to be like a separate thing that has disbanded, you know?
Can I ask a clarifying question? When did FUPU first come into existence? When did the band start?
2015.
Okay. And then at this point, how would you clarify? Would you say that you're on hiatus? Would you say that you're disbanded? Would you say that you're forever, but sometimes you record and play and sometimes you don't? How would you characterize the status of the band right now?
I would say FUPU is eternal, but we are at rest, you know? Okay. Because this world is very hard to get through, and my vocal cords and like rent in LA, just being in Los Angeles, like reality is real, but FUPU is eternal.
I hear that.
Geography is real. Like,
the pandemic is real.
the pandemic is extremely
the lack of,
real.
I mean, the way, because Mayfield, you talked about how many of your gigs have been canceled. Just, I mean, tours or opportunities for movement, performance, these things that you had lined up that are gone. I mean, how are you envisioning or considering your performance practice in this moment?
Well, it's been a real humbling experience for me of shifting away from this kind of, I mean, I feel like I've been preparing for this, for what has happened since March. I mean, with doing viewing hours, like, I mean, I would be under there for 2 hours at a time under the compost. And so like, I felt like that piece prepared me for this moment with, multiple pandemics, and there's something about, stopping and examining labor, examining the labor that Black femme folks there's just this expectation, right? And so like, I feel like doing that piece got me ready for this moment of like stopping. And when people were like, oh yeah, like there were people inviting me to do online stuff or teach online or do this festival on, I'm like, can we just not do that? Is that can we just not do it? And I got a lot of backlash, and it was like, and I was like, I don't even care anymore. Like this is not what is happening right now with the earth and with Black folks around the globe. This is a moment of reckoning. We are not separate from the earth, and Black folks around the globe, we are not separate from each other. This is a global Black Lives Matter movement. Like, look at what's happening in Nigeria. Like, and it's been happening, but like for the first time, it's like the earth is speaking to us, and we have to listen, and we're speaking to each other, and we have to listen to each other. And like, I'm not for nationalism at all, but I do think that there's a thread, there's a wound that has a thread that connects us as Black people around the world, and we need to look at that wound, and this is an opportunity to do that. And it probably won't even happen in our lifetime, but like, I mean, we have so many people. I'm thinking of Sun Ra, right? Sun Ra was like, he wrote this poetry book called The Earth is Doomed. And like, he was just already telling us like, what's up? Alice Coltrane too, And so I just feel like even, it was kind of like, yes, all of my work was kind of like gone. I was supposed to be traveling and touring and stuff like that. But like, I was ready. I think I definitely I was ready. I was getting ready, and I didn't even know it. Like my ancestor, like Marsha was like already telling me, girl, you need to chill. Stop working.
I feel very thankful that in January, as a part of a Martin Luther King Jr. Black movement ritual, I had an opportunity to collaborate and dance and move and build and rest and talk and debate and eat vegan chocolate cake with 3 incredible Black artists, Fox Whitney, Neve Mazik Bianco, and Randy Ford in Seattle at the Velocity Dance Center. And for me, I felt like the opportunity to do that with those dancers, to spend, significant time in a studio together. And again, that kind of intersection of the public and the private, which is a big part of what I'm interested in anyway. I mean, with the Call and Response project, which led to the Call for Experiments in Joy, there were 7, Black women performers with very different relationships to the words Black, woman, and performance, okay? Different ages, gender identities, sexualities, ethnicities, native languages, the whole deal. But we had an opportunity first to be together without anyone seeing or knowing what we were doing, and just to take that time and to talk to one another. And then from there, kind of go out into the stage and offer something. And at that experience, the version of that I got to do with those wonderful dancer artists in Seattle helped to prepare me for this moment where I feel a lot of grief and loss at the inability to perform live in front of people or to see live performance. That's a huge part of my life, something that I loved and that I felt fed me so much. And it's not there anymore. And so now this is what we have. And I'm so grateful for the chance to be here and to talk with you all and to know that there are, 60 people who have decided to spend the time to overhear us. But I mean, I wish I could see you people. I wish I could sort of smell you and like wave at you, or someone's asked like, where's Uhuru? And I think Uhuru is here. Uhuru, we love you. Drop something just in the Q&A to tell people like, I'm here, represent whatever. But I just think that we don't know. And there's something about that that's very intense and also is maybe connecting us to the mystery in a different way, giving us a chance to reflect, offering us a moment as well. These ideas about labor, that's also part of it. What is the labor that was hidden before that now is not so hidden? I think that that's a lot of what, for me, that private dancer work is about. It's about what we see and what we don't see, what we hear and what we don't hear. What is the invisible soundtrack? All of those things.
Yeah, and just like I remember reading how Tina Turner was a domestic before she became a musician, and Roberta Flack was a school teacher. And so these are things, there's just this way in which so much, I feel like, there's so much that has been done by Black women performers that no one will ever know, because the extraction of the labor is just that. And so I feel like in our generation, maybe we get a chance to shift that narrative and, to even, like you said, like redefine what woman, femme, what that is, or, that isn't for us. And to actually expose that, what that extraction looks like, and to be in a space where we can just do what we desire.
And be allowed, and to be seen or recognized as having desire.
Yes.
I think that's huge. And one thing I really admire about FUPU as a band, and one thing I deeply admire about Improvising While Black, Mayfield, one of your technologies and projects, is how value-centered it is, and it's how clear and aligned the values are as in part of the conveying of what it is. So that FUPU as a project was always what you just said, Jasmine, more than just like entertaining people at a big outdoor venue, that there were some values or principles that were important. And so you mentioned one of them, but I want to mention it again. I feel like I want to have an opportunity to touch into the 3 main values of FUPU, which, as I understand, are reparations, how we find freedom and raw expression through collaboration. So I don't know. I know, like, I'm such a nerd that if I were in the audience, I'd be like trying to write this all down so quickly. So I'm just gonna say it again. Or Jasmine, do you want to say the three? Since they're yours, you want me to do it? Okay, so I know this is when I do the steps for experiments and joy. I'm like, step one, tell the truth. Anyway, okay, so the three values for Fuck You Pay Us as a band, as a concept, as a project: reparations, how we find freedom and raw expression through collaboration. And do you want to say more, Jasmine, about how the band sort of came to these principles?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the band came to these principles through trial and error. It came to these principles through wanting to create a model of being together that did not center around whiteness. It came together through knowing that whatever brought us together and what is going to keep us together is honesty. What's going to keep us together is trust and playing off of each other and letting each other in so deeply that that feeling is what drives the sound. Not that we're all technically the best guitarists. Like, none of us actually knew how to play guitar. I'd never been in a band of this kind, like, especially like performing and stuff. Like it all felt very new to me, but I still trusted myself to do it. And it's funny now because now I'm trying to figure out what my solo sound would feel like, or like, even if I want to start another band. And I'm like, the magic of FUPU was so much deeper, where it's like, now it's like this hard work of having it. FUPU never felt like hard work. It was hard work to definitely keep going and to like do that, but the music itself always felt so easy and aligned and trusting. And it was us in a room where I'd be like, I have an idea for a song about LAPD. And then I just go like, da, 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 and just have the words come out. And then Tiana will come in with the sickest drums I've ever heard. And then Uhuru will come in with the, and then Ayatunde would come in with a drop and a lick. And it was always felt like something that was, it was not about, oh, you have to come here with a completed idea. Maybe I came in there with a lyric, LAPD don't mean shit to me. That's all I got, y'all. That's all I got. I got a little shit. That's all I got. And then from there, it was just so organic the way that it would happen and come. And like the voices that would come from my body also just always felt so different than what I was doing in my everyday, where it's like, I don't know, it just always felt like something that came from a place of abundance. It came from a place of, there is no one way to sound. There is no one way to talk. There is no like, and then just come in. That's all we're asking for you to do, is just come in. And so that freedom happened. And then me and Uhuru would always joke that we were a poly band, that we were able to flow and have different drummers and musicians and people come in. We're able to flow. When one time on stage, Uhuru's guitar stopped working, and it was me, Ayatunde, and Tiana having to come up with a song on the fly that had no guitar. And then we did that, and we waited, and we were patient. We kept the show going. And when the guitar came back, we all clapped. And it was like this moment of always being able to just be on the fly. We weren't always having to hold each other such strictness, because the world already done enough for us. We were already going to go home from, I was working retail most of the FUPU. I always had a job doing FUPU to pay my bills. And FUPU was my way of screaming and letting out and releasing, you know? FUPU became my therapy, became my support group. It was, and we all relied on each other for that feeling. And I feel like even the audience would come for us for that feeling. And I get that sense. I feel that sense of where people are screaming with us. People know, even the fact that FUPU has inspired at least 2 other bands that I know. I'm like, whoa, like we were so successful. We were wildly successful in all these ways where we've never even had a studio album, but we were so successful in the way of just creating a community and a world and a concept that would go further than just us.
Oh, I'm so inspired.
Yes.
I'm so inspired because it really shows that through relationship that you were able to work through and get to a vision of success that felt aligned with who you wanted to be, how you wanted to work. This is what you were talking about, Mayfield. Like I'm teasing you about not teasing about the grants, because I feel like that, but to be honest though, for me, that's related to the notion of reparations.
Yeah.
Although of course, having to apply and go through validation processes, et cetera, can be, I mean, there's a whole mind thing around that that's tricky, but just the idea, trying to work out what is our relationship to economics, to prosperity, to value, who sets that, how do we know? And in something like a band, how that then I would imagine is a collective conversation that you all have to have together in terms of what kinds of business relationships do you want to get into, who do you want to be dealing with, who don't you want to be dealing with, you know, all of that stuff. And it's hard, I mean, it can be complicated enough if you're a solo, like a lot of the work that I've done, although I've collaborated, you know, and even the Wild Beauty was a beautiful opportunity to work with other people, but most of what I've done has been alone, because that's been the conditions of my own labor, how I was able to sneak in with my full-time jobs and be able to make stuff, you know. But having to negotiate that with other people, you know, I've done that through a wonderful collective with Rosamundas King and Madhu H. Kaza, who represent in #1 Gold in New York City and other things. But you do have to, you can't jump, you can't skip. You have to really have conversations and figure it out, because if you try to jump ahead, you just get into trouble there. But some of the things that you said as well, Jasmine, I feel like connect collaboration to improvisation and some of the ideas of improvisation. I was curious, Mayfield, if you wanted to talk a little bit about Improvising While Black as a project.
Yeah, I mean, I could totally relate to what Jasmine was saying about this kind of just being in the moment with the work, right? And this is something that this is one of the main values of Improvising While Black, because the term Improvising While Black came out of me co-opting the term Driving While Black. So, you know, I had that experience, like, you know, I was incarcerated and for driving while Black. And, you know, once I started kind of bringing that into my thinking around dance and around like being a captive body without agency and what that feels like to walk around with that, you know, being a possibility at any moment as a Black person, improvising while Black, it became necessary for me to acknowledge that in my work as a dancer and improviser. And so, you know, that's what it was. It was like, okay, I'm going to not just improvise in this space that's very white. I'm going to improvise while Black, and I am going to disrupt, even if I'm just standing here, and I'm okay with that. Y'all are going to know in this Contact Improvisation Jam that I am improvising while Black. You're going to know.
And how do you signal that? I mean, what is the disruption there? How do you, I mean, obviously the body is already.
The disruption for me is like, is the acknowledgement. It's the acknowledgement. It's like, I'm going to like, y'all are quiet. I don't feel like being quiet. I'm going to sing. I'm going to put on some music. And they, you know, it's like, because so much of like, my experience with modern and contemporary dance has been, it's been a lot of white spaces. Like, you know, it's not like, but the other piece of it is also working with other Black folks within Improvising While Black. So like, you know, once I was able to really create performances and workshops through this framework, you know, I would have specific workshops with just Black people, because the idea with Improvising While Black is to really kind of be with those stories that can't be told, but also be within the wreck of our imagination, the wreck of this world, and to be able to play too, right? So like, I'm not a big fan of the Black joy thing, but I'm a big fan of play. And I'm a big fan of like trickster mentality. And I think that that there's a beauty and joy when it's multifaceted, when it's like, Gabrielle, you talk about this with your experiments in joy. There's a beauty and joy when it's like beyond the hashtag, but like when it's like you just find yourself in that joy because there's love, and that love has taken, time, and has, like you were talking about, your collaborations, and that love has taken, you know, it may be some uncomfortable. It may hurt a little bit,
Right.
but it's like, or if you're in grief and you get through the grief to get to joy, like, you know what I'm saying? So like, I just feel like there's this kind of improvising while Black is really about that, like, being in the question of Blackness, being in the question of like, what is this moment that I'm hustling in, that I'm gonna, that I'm gonna be like thinking on my feet, that I'm gonna be creating on my feet all the time in my life, not just on the stage, not just, in the classroom, but like in my life. And how is that connecting to all the work that I'm doing and the people that I'm working with?
I mean, and how does that relate to you, Jasmine? I feel like, and to FUPU as a band or to your other work that you do, how does it relate what Mayfield just said to your practice?
Yeah, I had to write down that line, acknowledgement is a disruption. I was like, exactly, like just even having the awareness and the awareness that you could do something that maybe before you didn't even conceptualize, and to trust that spontaneity and trust that side of yourself as a knowledge building place, as a place
Yeah.
where, yeah, as a place that can be cultivated within the body, within the psyche, within the knowing. It's just like so beautiful. And it's something that I've always been drawn to as how I lived. And it's gotten me in so much trouble, but it's also made me so able to trust the many sides of myself, to trust that I can be a knitter, crocheter, teacher, stoner, musician, rock star, like I can just be all these different things and trust that I will be okay. And I think that's one of the most beautiful things, and one of the things I hope that I inspire within myself. And one thing that I definitely know that I have inspired in other people is like to be able to see, especially to be able to see a dark-skinned Black woman trust the unknown, is something that I don't think I saw enough growing up. Because for me, the unknown was always about not knowing if you can pay your bills on time. That's the unknown. Not the unknown of what would happen if I use my voice in this way that feels guttural yet joyous. Like that is an unknown that we don't know is possible sometimes, Yeah. And so I like to think that that is also what is going to help get us free, is like keeping that sense of like the mysterious as creative, the mysterious as collaborative, the mysterious as something that like we can't always be told, that all of the lessons and all the knowledges aren't just going to be told to us, and we have to produce it sometimes. Mm-hmm. And I think that's also what attracted me to punk, this knowledge of like there's not like a legacy I knew of it, but that felt Black. Well, of course, no, that's actually not true. There's a big, strong Black legacy in punk, but I knew that that was open. It wasn't like I had to sound a certain way. I knew that legacy was all about the less you know is actually the more you can bring. It's that sense that is what made the punk tradition feel so at home for me in my heart. It made me feel like I can go on stage and not have, and like that, let the stage be a place to let go of anxiety, not gain more of it, So
I love what you just said, because I mean, I have a lot of admiration for different threads of like Black punk tradition, but this idea, like the less you know, the more you can bring, then all of a sudden that makes me think about how I came to performance art. And especially linking that to what you said about hue, because I have to say that I had never seen like a dark-skinned, plump, female-bodied performance artist. I just had not ever seen, I mean, and I was maybe sheltered or whatever the situation is. I laugh now because I think about how many incredible artists are working and what a wonderful moment we're living in. But still, it just felt like I had never seen anything. I'd never seen anyone like me do what it was that I felt in my heart I wanted to do. And then I didn't know how to do it. And I so I had to make it up. And that's Lucille Clifton. I mean, that whole idea of, who did I have to be but myself? I had to make it up on this bridge of starshine and clay. That's, I think, the intersection of FUPU, Improvising While Black, Private Dancer by Nikita Gale, Swallow the Fish by Gabrielle Seville. I mean, I just think that we've inherited so much. We have to synthesize so much. We have to dismantle so much. And we also have to reinvent. We have to make it up. And that's a process or a project, I think, as we see in FUPU, as we see in Viewing Hours, what you showed Mayfield, and as I think was gestured towards in the sculpture in the work by Nikita Gale, that's a process that has a lot of different emotional notes to it. That doesn't, I mean, when we talk about joy, if you're talking about Black joy, that isn't always happy, or doesn't it, because it's coming out of this other thing, which I think aligns with, Jasmine, how you just described punk, right? Or Black punk, or punk itself, I think, because punk itself is pretty Black, actually. But I think just in terms of the joy piece, I just have to come in since, I do have a soft spot for joy. And I just wanted to read, I'm gonna do something kind of baller, maybe. I'm gonna quote from myself, hello, Swallow the Fish. Experiments in Joy. But to claim joy at a moment of siege may seem selfish or delusional at first. Making performance art may seem this way too. But hum through the galleries of Adrian Piper's show. Check out Howardina Pendel's Free White and 21. Shimmy your fingers before Betty Saar's Mojo Hands. Behold their gifts of living presence. Behold the legacy of Black feminist ancestors. Read Ntozake Shange, Lucille Clifton, June Jordan, Audre Lorde, Suzanne Césaire, Jane Cortez, Jacqueline Boger-Rosier, Lori Carlos, Octavia Butler, Catherine Dunham, Ashe. These ancestors don't just rest in power, they radiate it. Black feminist joy does not disown awareness of systemic injustice. It does not deny oppression. It defies it. It doubles down on the imperative to imagine against the status quo, to dream bigger with satin and song. So that's what I feel like is maybe kind of my intersection to some of the questions around labor, power, performance, and like what we might not know, but what we do know, and how we can bring what we have into these spaces and change the perception or understanding of what Black performance is or can be. There are some, there's some beautiful things that are in this Q&A. There's actually a question for you, Mayfield. Cameron Burris would like for you to extrapolate more on the phrase extraction of labor that you mentioned. Can you say a little bit more about that? And Jasmine as well, if you have thoughts on that, you can feel free to add.
Yeah, I think that part of it is kind of what we've been talking about, like that being multifaceted sentient beings as we are, right? That labor, this is a complex kind of question for me, because labor has even, Blackness in labor is like, it wasn't even like the labor of the slave, right, was not even seen as labor. So when I say extraction, it's like, it's not really getting to the heart of the issue. The issue is that the labor was not even acknowledged as labor. And so, somebody like Tina Turner, the way that she has been used, her labor has been extracted, does not necessarily reflect her brilliance or her disruption or her redefinition of rock and roll. like how she just recreated rock and roll. She just made rock and roll sexy, and like she just became rock and roll. Like Tina Turner, but like nobody says that, but she did. I mean, I remember watching her. I was like, this is rock and roll. Why didn't I know this? Why didn't anyone tell me this? And I'm watching her. And so the way that her labor was extracted without even being attributed to her, you know, is just something that I think is complex within the context of the historical reality of slavery, when also the labor, that kind of extraction is like not just an extraction of labor, it's like an extraction of life. So like this kind of conversation, you know, it kind of eats its tail because like, is our labor our life? Is our life our labor? How do we, how do we process that? How does one process that? And so I think that's, when I said that, that's kind of what I was mulling over or trying to work through.
Yeah. And one thing that I'm so curious about with all of us, most of us working at home, we have to truly define those stops of our labor for ourselves. And I really hope a lot of Black people are really taking that time to define that rest for themselves, to clock out when they need to, not to feel like they have to constantly be producing right now. Like, yeah, when you talk about these divides, like you have to really, like as creative people, they think that we are inexhaustible. As Black people, they think that we are inexhaustible. You have to create your own stops, know your own boundaries, and like form them for yourselves.
Yeah.
Jasmine, you are just speaking directly to me right now. I feel something in me is like, listen to Jasmine. It was so powerful because I feel like right now, it's not even so much that we are working from home, but that we're living at work. And so it's difficult. And especially when there's so much validation for productivity. And I think that some of the things that I write about is really growing up as like a very good girl and very much like believing that my value came from achievement. Okay. And so what happens if you feel like you're not achieving as much? Are you not as valuable? Does the society only want you if you are working for it somehow? And then connecting to what you just said, Mayfield, like what happens if they don't even see it as work, but they think that's just what you are, that your purpose is to do this thing? There's been a Roach a long time ago, or I used to teach something. It was really helpful to talk about how, you know, in the 19th century, when people were looking in New Orleans, when they were like white folks looking at, you know, like Black dancers, they just thought like, oh, that's just how they are. That there wasn't the idea that there was a skill or there was choreography or that there was teaching or that there were, you know, or I just think there's some interesting things about like what gets constituted as labor or understood as labor versus an essentialized idea of like what you are. That's just how you are. That's just what you can do. And there's certainly a lot of raw talent. You know, I think I've witnessed both of you in the work that you do, and it's I mean, just the talent that comes off from you is so powerful. And also the work that it actually takes to come onto a stage and to do something, you know, whether or not you know how, whether or not you know how to play a guitar or not, when you're on the stage and you have the guitar, you're doing something, or what you had to do to get onto that stage to make that show happen. There's a labor there. And then who is that labor for? Where does it go? Can it be turned into a kind of self-generating engine of power? Is it offered into different communities? What happens to it? Those are some interesting questions for me. I'm trying to see part of people. I don't know what you all can see or can't see in the audience. And so I'm just gonna say that Nikita Gale, the artist, has written, you know, so grateful for your intellectual labor and time tonight. This talk has been really fantastic. And I think of extraction all of the time, Mayfield. Recording studios are extraction sites.
Wow.
Performance is raw material to refine. And the most compelling thing about Tina is that she retired, stopped working. The decision to retire helps frame performance as labor in an interesting way too. I wanted to make sure to lift up Nikita, who is—
Nikita, I have a story to talk about for when you talk about performance as a raw material to refine. I think about this moment when these videographers would come and record FUPU, and they tell us that they're gonna send us the video, all this stuff, and they never do. And it's almost like this thing where it's like they own that footage. They own that footage of us. And I may never see that performance. I might be, I hate to say this, but like if I am dead and they want to share this footage, they can sell it and make money while I'm in a grave. Like it's this way where it's like, especially when where they honestly, like the people who extract, there's so much power there, and there's so much hidden kind of intentions. There's so many ways that could just become its own thing that moves without the performer at all, which makes it so wild. Like, what is it? What? There's a whole structure of what happens from the extractions. Yeah, it really is like, and it just goes somewhere else, never to be seen again by the place or the people who created it.
Yeah, and with dance, like when my work, some of my work has been recorded, I'm supposed to like literally go after those recordings. You know what I mean? Like I have to send emails, I have to do all this labor to get my work, to get recordings. Dance is ephemeral, it's not like, and so like I'm still like even years back looking for recordings that have been, taken by other people.
And that is something around, in particular, sort of like Black women's creative practice, especially in performance, has been so lost because there often wasn't an interest in documenting that. I think about Modell Bass, the incredible artist model, and there's a scholar who did such beautiful work, just saying like, well, Modell Bass, we have images of her because of Edward Weston. We have images of her because of maybe like Alfred Stieglitz or kind of male photographers that used her as a muse, but she was an artist herself, but there's no documentation left of anything that she herself did. I mean, what is that? So it's something around the ephemerality of performance, and then the materiality of the archive. I think about the materiality of Private Dancer and how like the structure, how metallic, how all of that is, and how different that is from the flesh of Tina's body that isn't there but inspired it. Anyway, I want to make sure to get this question from Erica for you, Jasmine. I discovered FUPU at the Palladium show. How did that gig come to be?
Okay. Yeah, I'd love to answer that. But one more thing about this extraction and that relationship. One beautiful example of extraction used for good is that for a show that was like really like a beautiful show at a community space, that's actually that recording of that show is our only shared album, and it's a live album. And that was from someone recording us who recorded all the sound and made it into audio files for us and gave it to us with no lines, no like, oh, I need per tempo, none of that. They're like, my reparations is doing this for you. And when I say how grateful we are to that, because that was way before we knew that we would do a studio album and stuff, like at least we had that one archive. And that's a beautiful thing that happened. So that's one, but also the question about how the Palladium show happened. It happened through an email. It happened through an email from Bikini Kill. They asked us to open for them at the Palladium. And it just happened through an email. I think that somebody from the band in Bikini Kill had seen us perform before and thought of us for when they did this show. And that show taught me a lot because that was also one of our biggest shows. That show had 5,000 people, around 5,000 people. And it was so incredible. The lights, the sound, everything felt so aligned. It was so beautiful, but it was also one of the most dramatic shows I've ever had. I know, because of that's where they wouldn't let us backstage. That's where I had to pee outside because they wouldn't even let me back to go pee after I loaded all our stuff into the truck. They wouldn't even have to pee on the Palladium because they wouldn't let me back in. And that's when they threatened to call the cops on me after I just performed, like that was like out of control. But again, performing while Black, where they want us on stage, but that whole the toilet part, it was just like, but it also taught me so much about just like being on that level, being on that stage and feeling so comfortable in front of 5,000 people, as comfortable as I felt in front of 10. That was an important ass lesson that will propel me so much more forward, that I am extremely grateful for. Because like once you know you can do something, no one can take that away from you. Once you know, like, it's like, I could, unstoppable.
Love it. I love it. I love it. Unstoppable. I know this is not a traditional chat. This is just a Q&A block, but I miss a little bit of vibration from audience. This is like the performer in me. So those of you who are out there, if you still have it within you, just if you could drop like one word or one phrase that's coming to mind based on some of the things that we talked about, just so that we get some kind of, feedback or energy from you. Just right now, kind of like, based on this conversation that you've been listening to, like, what are you thinking about now? Or what's really jumping to mind? And just drop it in the Q&A so we can see. Hey.
Oh,
Symbiosis, rawness. Grateful that something good happened from your experience. Collective, collaboration, improvisation, connection, labor, metaphysical, amazing. Grateful. Uhuru. Uhuru, where are you? Uhuru. Tapping into that creative. See, look at this. Thank you.
Wow.
Thank you. Thank
Incredible.
You for just giving us something back. It is so hard in these Zooms to have folk and like not know what's happening. And I think that teaches me how much information is actually passing in that performative moment. And often we talk about how every performance is different because the audiences are different, the moment is different, you're different, and the interaction between the two. So thank you all for giving us a little something here. We just have a few more minutes left, so if folk have other questions that they want to ask, feel free to put them in the Q&A. And Mayfield and Jasmine, if you have any questions for each other, for me.
I mean, I have a question about, I'm so excited to meet you, Jasmine, and I totally admire you and your work. When I first saw FUPU, I was like, oh my God, I used to go to punk shows when I wish I had a punk band when I was a teenager. But like, I really, I'm really curious about your anti-capitalist value. Somebody put value at the bottom here, and how, I just feel like with Afropunk, like I mean, I remember when that first Afropunk came out. I know some folks, involved in that first iteration, the film and stuff. And like, I just feel like those were punks. Those were Black punks, And I'm like, over the years, I don't know. I don't even know like where people are with like, punk. Like Black punk, like Bad Brains, like, I mean, not just Bad Brains, but like there's so many like ways in which like I felt that there was just this kind of other culture that we were creating with each other. We were living in cooperatives, we were queer, we were just doing like our lives, but like really, really like on the margins. And I don't know, I feel like there's a way in which the co-optation of that reality of like really like living punk has been a strange development, I guess, I don't know. I'm kind of like a child of the 80s and 90s. So, I'm a little bit older, and I'm just curious for you, like what is that sensibility for you? I mean, I see it in what you're doing, and that's why I'm so excited about it. But like, you know, for the old school people like me, like how is it happening for you so that you are like feeling like you're not being co-opted?
That's a really brilliant question. That's such a good question. It's one of those questions that like, it would change every day. That answer would change every single day. It depends on my mental health. It depends on where I'm at. It depends on like so much. It depends on my bank account. It depends on a lot. But I would say what I want to keep in mind, or what the values of punk that I want to keep alive within me, is this idea, the values that you can never age out of. Like this idea that this system was not made with you in mind, so don't create with the system in mind. That's something that is ageless, that I'll always carry with me. This idea that you don't have to know something brilliantly, you don't have to research it for hours to feel a part of it. You don't have to, I don't have to have played the guitar for years to feel connected to sharing it. That's something that will stay with me ageless, continuum. I think what starts to make punk feel like oh, it's only for young kids and stuff like that is like almost like the aesthetics of it, but the aesthetics go so far. Clothes shred,
right?
But value, idea, that energy, that stuff is what really keeps you propelling. Like for example, like when I think of my mom, I think of my mom as a single mom teacher who raised 5 kids. I can't think of anything more punk than her sometimes. I'm like the way she kept her humor, the way she kept her accent, the way she kept herself. She always had this joy about her. There was something about her that made and the way that she was a Scorpio too. And I feel like Scorpios are very big punks, you know, that way of like, that cackle, that way, like she chases around with dead bugs as entertainment. You know, it's like, you know, these ways of just like knowing that we're gonna have to create our own moments of connection because we can't rely on them to tell us how to connect to each other. You know, like, and that's ageless. But those moments for me where I feel the most like out of sync with these values happen when I almost like, when I don't get to connect with other people, when I don't like, especially during quarantine where I haven't been to even a music show in I haven't been to a music show since February maybe or January. But I still have to keep that feeling, you know, like how do I keep that feeling? I listened to some FUPU earlier today and that made me feel like I was back on that stage, you know, screaming. And I'm so lucky to have this experience of like something to point back to that I know I created. I put my own funk in it. I put my funk in something. I don't know, like, you know, like having that is something powerful.
Like punk, right? Like,
That makes me think of Bootsy. Definitely. I mean, this is something that relates, we're drawing to a close, but I see 2 questions here that maybe one of them maybe has been partially responded to, but I still am going to lift it up. Zoe Elizabeth Masangsong asked, can you talk about Afropunk? And Mayfield, I was wondering when you were talking about your early experience kind of, you know, being on the margins and making and being in bands and doing things, did you consider yourself to be a part of Afropunk? Or is Afropunk a term that has sort of come afterwards to characterize a set, like a lineage, like, you know what I mean? I'm curious about Afropunk as well. What is that to the 2 of you?
I mean, when the movie came out, when the Afropunk movie came out, I have friends in that movie, like we lived together, you know, like that was like so cool. Like these are Black fucking punks. And it was just like, I mean, I wasn't like super like in the scene growing up, but like I went, you know, I definitely went to punk shows and I loved the music. I mean, I love, you know, like you said, the aesthetic only went so far, but like, you know, I definitely had my aesthetics and, you know, but
wait, so did you have the bobby, did you have the safety pins and the shredded, you know?
I had green docs and I definitely had my steel toe boots when I went to shows because I didn't want to get stomped on. And so like, you gotta get ready. I never did the pins. But like, you know, I just had my own little style and that, you know, I was like in my 20s and it was it was just fun, but there wasn't a lot of Black folks, like a lot of Black punk bands and stuff. And so, you know, I mean, I tried to see Fishbone. I went to see Fishbone is a lot. But really it was like being with, you know, with my Black friends who are punks and listening to music in our rooms together. And like, just like, you know, just being with the music. And so like, you know, I wasn't like deep in any scene. I was kind of like never wanted to be in a scene, but going to live music was like a huge thing. And the Afro punk, when Afro punk came out, it was just a huge, it meant a lot to me because I hadn't, well, because my friends were in the movie, and I hadn't really seen it come together in that way where, you know, and then how it grew, like it just grew and grew and grew. And I was living in San Francisco at the time, so there's a lot of like underground music. So yeah, I mean, it was just like part of my life. It wasn't so much like, oh, I'm a punk. I was just like kind of on a DL about it because I was just like, this is like who I am, but I'm also so much more. And these are my friends.
Mm-hmm. I mean, Jasmine, what about you? I mean,
oh my gosh. I would say that I appreciate Afropunk for the opportunities it provides for smaller bands. I appreciate when they actually respect smaller bands. People could really use that space and that stage. But I have to say, it's honestly kind of disgusting to see how much they value bigger names and people who are already have millions of followers, lots of money. They value them so much more than they value the smaller bands. And I know it was not always like that. I know that came with capital investments. I know it came with all these Black capitalist people, but I'm just saying that like, that's something that makes me very sad. Like I was like not expecting that, but I do think that it's still so important. It is this beautiful thing where it can be the equal playing field. Like it was cool that a band like FUPU played on the same stage as Tyler the Creator. That is inherently cool.
But Tyler the Creator,
just in terms of having access for overlap for the audiences, just in terms of.
But I mean, Afro punk is not punk anymore. That's the thing.
Yeah, that's
like
the thing.
I'm just gonna say it. Like it's not punk anymore. I don't know why they call it punk Afro.
Well, that's what I think this question is. I mean, what's interesting to me about the question, like, can you talk about Afropunk, is that you end up talking about a lot of things. You're talking about a documentary. You're talking about a festival. And like what I keep thinking about is a term that's become an umbrella term for almost like different kinds of Black alternative sort of, or seemingly alternative, but like alternative to what? Like, you know, alternative to hip hop, except not exactly, especially talk about someone like Tyler, the creator who is pretty punk in a lot of ways in my mind, for sure. So I don't know. I know we're coming to a close. And so this to me could be a whole other conversation. I think what we did tonight, or what I felt like was interesting in terms of thinking about performance, that was what we're talking about, and with some relationship to punk, but I know people could go deep in just on punk itself and bring in different musicians and bring in different makers and creators. So maybe that'll be part 2. The last word before we say goodbye, do either of you have any tips about sort of navigating mental health relative to creative power? This is the last question, and I think it's a good one, so I want to make sure before we sign off and say goodbye, if either of you can speak to how mental health impacts what you do, or how to find ways to I guess, engage positive mental or negative mental health, whatever's going on in terms of creativity. Any thoughts?
I would say see art as your sanctuary, not as your cage. Don't get limited by what you think something should look like, and just feel it as something you should feel through.
Yeah. And I think that, yeah, I love that. And I think that rage is a gift. And I feel that's why I was so attracted to punk in the first place, because I was able to express rage. And I don't think that, you know, Black folks, we don't, like, it's almost like we're not supposed to be like rageful. But I feel like that kind of like energy is so beautiful when it's like fully expressed and held. And I think that that's something that, and it doesn't even have to be loud. It can be like right here. It can be soft. It can be really like, you know, contained in a way if you want it to be, but it can also be explosive. And so I think that for my mental health, I need to express my rage. And maybe that's why I feel like I'll always be a punk, because like I value that expression of life, of being alive. And so and I think that's something that Tina Turner, you know, taught the world too.
Well,
Just being badass, you know.
Expressing
she
life.
continues to be badass. As do the two of you. I want to thank you both so much for the opportunity to have this conversation. And also, I want to thank the California African American Museum for bringing us together just to chop it up a little bit. And I want to lift up again Nikita Gale's Private Dancer. And you know, people should definitely go and spend some time with those images. And I'm going to give it back to Cameron Shaw to send us off.
Hi, everyone. I apologize. It got super dark where I am, and I wasn't well set up with my light, so just feel me in my darkness. But thank you all so much for being here and sharing your knowledge and your experience and your wisdom. I worked so closely with Nikita on this exhibition, so in addition to just being able to be with you all and your words, it was also so special to have so many of the conversations Nikita and I had about this exhibition and the work itself reflected in your experience. It added just an incredible layer of complexity and nuance that I know is embedded in Nikita's work. And shout out to Nikita for hopping in the Q&A to reinforce that in the beautiful ways that she can. So yes, thank you all again for being here tonight. And thank you everyone in our very, very collaborative and reactive and responsive and beautifully generous audience tonight. It is really challenging to figure out how we can continue to connect in these times, but these moments offer something so special in that sharing. So thank you all again, and we will see you soon, we hope, at the California African American Museum. Good night.
And thanks to Alessandra as well from the California African American.
Yes.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you so much.